Alejandra, Ale, thank you for taking the time for joining me here on Inclusive Cyber. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, and just super excited and eager to kind of dive into your background, which is straddling technology and education. But with that being said, can you provide a quick kind of origin story of who Ale is?
Sure. And thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today and to share my story with people. Hopefully, it is inspiring or provides some guidance. But my origin story and what has led me to where I am today, I'll try to give the shorter synopsis. But I am the child of immigrants, the granddaughter of Mexican farm workers, which I'm particularly proud of these days because our farm workers are being targeted. My grandfather was a very important contribution to this country. So, yeah, the daughter of Mexican immigrants. My whole life, I grew up learning that it was important to be proud of where we came from and to give back to our community. So I always grew up knowing that that was something that I wanted to do. Where I am in my life and where I was going in my life as a young person could not have been possible without the support and sacrifices of my parents and grandparents. So that was always something that I wanted to give back to in my life. So that, I think, ultimately is what led me onto the path of education, because that, of course, is one of the best ways to give back to our world. I started off as a college advisor, so kind of how teachers have the Teach for America program. There's a similar program called the College Advising Corps that I went through. So I was a college advisor for high school students. That was my first kind of big girl job after college. So again, through the shorter synopsis, like we'll start there, but there were a lot of other education related things that happened before that. Really loved working with students to this day. Sorry to all my bosses, but it's the best job I've ever had. I mean, you just can't compare hanging out with young people, right? Really loved making a difference in individuals' lives, but in the just 2 years that I did that work, I already felt that there were cycles that were going to continue to happen. So every year, policymaker or decision maker was going to decide to change the college application process, and we were all going to have to deal with it. So that was frustrating, and that's what put me on what I hoped to be the policy route. Went to grad school at the University of Michigan to learn how to change the system, and that was the goal. Did some work in philanthropy, which is foundations that give money to organizations to do the work that they do. Also did some work in policy in Washington, D.C., and that was how I actually ended up getting into technology. But I'll pause there because that's a fun deviation of the story.
Yeah, no, Ale, I love your background. And just to kind of comment on 2 points that you mentioned, I'm come from a family of immigrants as well. My parents are from Mexico, so we have, that shared kind of ancestry there. An interesting fact, though, my abuelito, all his siblings came to the U.S. He refused, even though she
Really?
did. Yeah, he did not like Los Americanos, right? For
Uh-huh.
whatever reason. He lived with us when I was younger. He died when I was 13, 14, but I never really appreciated him and try to learn his story. And so he was part of the Bracero program.
Yeah, my grandpa as well.
Yeah, so he did that. He supported this country. As you're saying, immigrants, I'm always playing that song from Hamilton, immigrants, we get the job done. And that's something that leaders like you and your voices and your stories, I think, are needed, especially in this time. So, and then also pivoting off that, your philanthropy work, working with students, I really admire that because I think a lot of people, they really don't go for that because let's face it, a lot of people chase the money, right? So
Right.
that's a underappreciated career field in this country. Instead of paying athletes or publishing editors of kind of the Hollywood stars getting millions, we're unfortunately not paying our educators enough money for them
Right.
to make an impact. So I just wanted to comment on that.
Yeah, sure.
But love your background and especially also going into policy work. Can you give me a little in-depth perspective when you're doing policy work in DC?
Yeah. So I was a policy analyst at a think tank called New America. They focus on a lot of different topics. A think tank is an organization that does research and kind of like leads society's thoughts on where we should go and can influence policymakers with their research and with their thought leadership. I was part of the higher education team, and that was my first unofficial entry into EdTech, education technology, because my job was to do research on how higher education institutions were using predictive analytics to help students succeed. So I was tracking like what people were doing, what the challenges were, and wrote a report on how to communicate predictive analytics findings to students without freaking them out and causing them to drop out. So mostly focused on that. Also got to do some more traditional policy work, going to the Capitol to learn about different legislation that was coming by, and mostly participating in like what we call thought leadership, which is publishing blogs, speaking at conferences or doing interviews, talking about pros and cons of certain policy stances to try to influence legislation in DC.
Yeah, I'm familiar with New America. There was somebody there doing cybersecurity works. I forgot his name. I think his name was Peter. Just remember the first name, but
Oh, again, maybe.
remember now. But I
Yeah.
used to be
Or
almost kind of their publicist because they wrote a book, and I told everybody to read the book, and everybody would mock me. Are they paying you for this? I'm like, no, it's a
yeah,
great
no, I
show
just really
book.
like the book. Yeah.
But I think it really broke it down from a basic level instead of other books that are super heavy on the tech speak, if that makes sense. So
Yeah. Yeah.
you also mentioned about the cycle of, I guess, policy being changed or requirements for students. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when I was a college advisor, two big changes happened. The SAT exam, which is an exam that is sometimes required to gain admission into colleges and universities, the SAT changed their scoring system. So they went from 2,400 total points to 1,600. So I don't know, whatever. There were changes. This was before the pandemic. And then the other change was changes to the FAFSA, the application for the free application for federal student aid. What tax information was required changed from one year to the next. So those were the two changes that I experienced. I don't necessarily feel the need to share my opinions about them. Like that was irrelevant. It was more about like other people are making these decisions, and I have to help students navigate that every single year. And the folks making these decisions don't necessarily know what it's going to be like on the ground when they decide to make these changes. So that was largely part of what motivated me to try to go into policy. Didn't ultimately end up in policy, but it was a very good start.
I love that. And it definitely makes sense, helping students navigate the bureaucracy that these systems tend to push out, rather. So let's kind of pivot a little bit into the technology space. So
Yeah.
walk me through, you're in education, now you're pivoting into the technology space.
Yes. And I didn't mean to leave everyone on a cliffhanger, but I did want to transition more smoothly to that, because the short of it is that I was in education. The goal was to probably be in education for the rest of my life. And truly by accident, I ended up in tech. Despite having grown up in San Jose, which is the capital of Silicon Valley, the hub of technology in the world, I had never considered working in technology. It was not something that I ever envisioned for myself. And I much less envisioned transitioning from education to technology. I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know that was possible in general or possible for me. So this transition happened by accident. After DC, I guess to give more detail, after DC, I moved back to California during the pandemic and started to really do the policy work that I thought I wanted to do. I was at a smaller organization, actually going to Sacramento and talking to legislators and their staff. But I quickly realized that I didn't actually like that. It just didn't feel good to me. It's great work and it needs to happen. I just wasn't the person to do it. I decided to leave the organization that was at, and didn't have another full-time job lined up. So that was very scary. But around the same time, I got a message on LinkedIn from someone who worked at a startup who found a report that I had written while I was at New America. That report on how to communicate predictive analytics findings to students ended up paying its dividends to me a few years later. A startup co-founder reached out to me, said, hey, we do similar work, and we really need someone who is an expert in what you're an expert in. Do you want to join us on a part-time basis and advise us and help us with our product? So I did that part-time for a while, and it was a very interesting new experience. So when people ask me, how did you get into tech? I say it was kind of largely by luck. I didn't do anything on purpose to get into tech. So maybe I'm not the best person to ask for advice there.
No, I like that. It's kind of that serendipitous aspect of life, right? And to your point, I think I recently posted something on LinkedIn talking about luck, that a lot of people don't realize how much luck plays in our lives. And I know some people might not call it luck, but I think we still have to do our due diligence and all the work. Like in your case, you laid that foundation, that paper, that report, and it's out there, right? So now this opportunity, a co-founder reaching out to you, a lot of people would definitely be envious to hear from a co-founder coming from Silicon Valley. They're like, what? That's amazing. How did that happen? Yes, it's luck, but you laid that foundation to I guess, increase the probability or the chances for good things to happen to you there. So
yeah, we definitely have to do our part, and luck is definitely a part of it as well.
Yeah, definitely. Walk me through a little bit of that startup and how you gain additional maybe insight in technology world. How did you combine your policy work with this new kind of tech field?
Yeah, that was such an experience, honestly. I had never worked in the private sector before. So there was a lot of private sector speak that I was not familiar with, like KPIs. I was like, what the hell is a KPI? I don't know what that is. So learning that, the speed was so much faster. But I also liked that things felt very practical and tangible. Sometimes and often in policy, you don't see the result of your work for years, and in research also years. In tech, it just felt like things were much more concrete, tangible, and achievable. So that worked for me. But how did I bridge education and technology? Like I said, a lot of learning. I was drinking through a fire hose at the very beginning.
Yeah.
But I felt that my experience at New America doing research on how institutions were using predictive analytics and my experience as a college advisor were actually really great experiences that informed how I helped the company. The company used AI to engage with students based on their mindsets, and would send out an alert if a student was at risk for potentially dropping out of school based on their mindset, and not so much like demographic factors. As a former counselor or a former college advisor, I knew what things looked like on a like cyclical level, like what happened every year in the college application process or in a student's first year at college. I knew what it felt like to talk to an actual student. All of those things were experiences that I was able to contribute to the actual product. And ultimately, that experience led to us trying to at least change the algorithm from being deficit-based to being both deficit and asset-based. So the model was originally looking only at where students were making mistakes or where they had challenges to overcome, which is fine. Those are things that we all need help with. But it wasn't leveraging students' strengths to help them overcome whatever challenges they had. So I feel that my experience as an educator really helped inform that.
Yeah, I definitely love that. What year was that? You just mentioned AI. I know we're going to be talking about AI here shortly, but what year
Yeah.
was that?
This was now, I was with that company 2022 through 2024-ish. So it wasn't that long ago, but it was definitely like pre-chat GPT and like the giant wave that happened after that. I was still at that company when the chat GPT explosion happened.
Got it. Yeah, and I was just kind of curious because yeah, ChatGPT, what late 2023, and I'm sure it was in development way before that, but I
Right,
think
right. But when it hit the public discourse,
right, right. Another comment that you mentioned about policy work versus the private sector, and I think that's a critical point that I want to highlight, and especially for the listeners doing any
yeah.
type of transition work, it is completely different. And I think, yeah, I mean, you definitely noticed that the bureaucracy in government is just slow, right? And sometimes you question, does it have to be slow? And nobody wants to rock the boat, right? The private sector, I'm old school, and the way I look at it and kind of the way I work, it's kind of Miami Vice TV show in the 80s, Speedboat. It is constantly going super fast, right?
Yeah.
So did did you struggle with that mindset, always kind of go, go, go?
Um, I did and I didn't. I did in the sense that I wasn't used to the speed, so now I just felt like I was always the slow one holding everyone behind. I was also going through a lot in my personal life at the same time that that transition happened, so it's just a lot to handle. Also was a challenge to transition because I'm going to say an unpopular thing, we are not held accountable to anything in education. Teachers, to an extent, are. Students have to get good grades, and there's state testing. In higher ed, does a college get in trouble if they have a low graduation rate? Very, very rarely.
Interesting.
In the nonprofit world, what are you held accountable to? Meeting the deliverables of your grant, but if you don't, it has to get pretty bad for you not to get the grant again, right? In
Right.
the private sector, there are things every day that are very real that you get held accountable to. And for better or for worse, it's money, it's the bottom line, right? So that made the tasks that we did every day feel much more not important, but like I really did have to get them done because there was a very clear measure that I was being compared to, right? So that was a transition. Where I feel like it wasn't a difficult transition was I welcomed the speed as much as it was difficult and the invitation to try things and to have them not work and just feeling like things were much more tangible and practical. That's very difficult in the education world, rightly so. If you're experimenting with people's lives, so you can't just be trying things all the time. I don't feel like that was an environment that I thrived in. I did welcome the speed and the culture of trying things.
You mentioned two kind of interesting facts there, accountability and failure, right? So the accountability aspect, I appreciate your insight. I wasn't aware, or maybe I just didn't take the time to really learn about the accountability, for higher ed. If yes, they're graduating classes or specific demographics weren't meeting certain thresholds, then yeah, who is accountable for that? So that's interesting there. And then the other one, I think, especially with Silicon Valley, they do have this culture that I really like about failing fast, right? Because yes, like you said, it's about the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
They want to see if okay, this works. Does it work? If it doesn't, let's break it or find ways to break it to make sure it doesn't break anymore, right? So that's definitely interesting.
Yeah.
During this time, did you have any mentors kind of helping you within, the education space when you first started, and then when you pivoted into technology?
Yeah, great question. Yes, I did have mentors mostly in my transition from education to technology. I had a lot of mentors, I think, also throughout my education career, big sisters when I was in graduate school. my high school counselor. These were all informal mentors, but I think mentors nonetheless. I didn't have my first formal mentor until I started to transition into tech. It's a fun story of how I got connected to my mentor. I was on a panel. I no longer worked at New America, but I was on a panel about my work from New America, and it was sponsored by a tech company. This was, I think, with an industry newspaper in higher ed, like the Chronicle of Higher Ed or something, and a tech company was sponsoring it. So they had a little pause for the sponsor to talk about whatever they were doing. And so I watched that because it was a pause in the panel. And I noticed this man talking about what he was doing at the company related to higher ed. And I noticed in his background, he had a lot of bikes and a lot of medals and then a little flag. And I think it was a Colombian flag. And I was like, I think this man is probably Colombian. He has a Colombian flag. And so after that panel, I ended up reaching out to him and saying, hey, I saw that we were on this panel together. I would love to connect. And we did. Once we were on the call, I said, not to be nosy, but I noticed all this stuff in your background. Are you Colombian? My then fiance and now husband, my husband's Colombian. And he was like, yes, I am Colombian. So that was our little point of connection. But I decided to ask him kind of more formally, I'm thinking of going into tech. Can you be someone that I kind of ask questions to? Can you mentor me? That was the first time that I've ever done that formally. And he thankfully said yes. I'll share his name. His name is Hernan Londoño, and he works at Lenovo. I hesitated just because I don't want anybody else to steal my mentor. He's been a wonderful friend and mentor for me for about 3 years now, has guided me through a couple of transitions and just provides wonderful, wise advice in the tech world that is very aligned with my values. You didn't ask me, but if I had to give folks advice on having a mentor, I would say definitely yes. Try to have a mentor because for me, it's been a very valuable experience.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that story. And I agree with you 100%. I think mentors are kind of the key to our not only professional careers, but even personal as well. It could be family members, it could be, coworkers, or in this case, somebody who you're on a panel with there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's the most precious thing that people can give is time. So it doesn't matter if you're the richest person or a person don't have any money. Neither of those two individuals can make more time, right? Mm-hmm. So I think time, it's only a short period of time that we're here on this earth, and people helping other people. I think that's what it's all about, right? Especially in our times right now. It seems like nobody is looking out for one another. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's vital. If there was a student reaching out to you and asking you how to get a mentor, what advice would you give them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because I also feel like I found my mentor through luck. I think finding a mentor can be a formal ask or a formal relationship, or it just kind of happens, right? Maybe you'll already have mentors in your life and you haven't realized it, or you realize that you look up to someone and you need to formalize that mentor relationship. But if a student wanted to go the more formal route of obtaining a mentor, I would say to one, look around you, see if there are people that you feel that you can learn something from or that you admire, and be brave and go up and ask. You would be surprised how flattered people are to have someone ask them to be their mentor. And if that doesn't feel like something that's within your physical vicinity, we thankfully have the internet. And I am a big proponent of using LinkedIn, no matter what stage of your career you're in. So I would say start to get active on LinkedIn, see what voices you're seeing on your feed. And if you find someone that is doing something related to what you're interested in, again, be brave and make the ask. You would be surprised at how generous people are with their time. And if they're not, that says more about them than about you.
Yeah, great advice. And, again, probably the only thing I would add is, yeah, don't get offended if they don't respond. So I reach
Yeah.
out. So one thing I forgot to tell you, thank you for responding to my LinkedIn post. I send dozens every week, and for the most part, I get crickets. I get nothing. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
And again, I don't take it personal, but if anybody's reaching out for a mentor, I did talk to a previous guest. How many times should you reach out? And they had recommended 3 times, right? The first time, it might be that they're busy. Second time, but after the third time, they don't reach back, then they're probably either not interested or just busy. Don't take it personal and move on
Yeah.
to next there.
Yep.
So definitely love that. So
Great advice.
Ale, let's transition into the word or the phrase of the millennia, unfortunately, artificial intelligence. So
Right.
wanted to get your perspective. So I always start macro. So is it good or bad for society from your perspective? And then now we drill into the education sector. And we'd love to get your perspective on whether or not AI, GenAI is good for the tech sector, ed tech sector.
Yeah, and thank you for making that differentiation. Generative AI. AI, artificial intelligence, has existed for a long time. The example that I like to give is like Siri on an iPhone. But yes, generative AI is, new to society, new to the masses. Is generative AI good for us broadly, you said, or good for tech?
First, not for
Broadly.
society.
So what I'm going to share is my personal opinion, does not reflect that of my employer or any other organization that I am associated with. I am in between right now. I think there are really great things that can happen with AI. Medical advances, even increased productivity for individuals, catching more students who could need help. Those are all good things. And then the side that I don't like is the environmental impact, the impact that it can have on us as people, on relying on a robot to give us answers and advice, and generating, I guess it's not so much the AI's fault, but how humans are using AI, generating, we'll call it like malicious content. Those things I don't like. The environmental piece of it is really frustrating me right now as well. But I think because of my mentor, I think of the rise of AI as the rise of the internet. And that was also a moment where people were really afraid and didn't know what was going to happen. And I think of 2 things. I saw a clip of, I think, Bill Gates on a talk show. I don't remember with what talk show host. He was describing the internet before it existed, which is so crazy to me. He said, you can find whatever information you want on the internet, I don't know, golfing or sports or nature. And the talk show host said something like, why would I want that? There's libraries for that. Or I have a magazine subscription for golf. What would I need the internet for? And now looking back, that is such a silly answer. There have been many good things that came from the internet. You and I would not be having this conversation, for example, without
That
the
is
internet.
true. Yeah.
And then also really bad things that have come from the internet, social media is both good and bad, has good things, and it has done harm to our society as well. So I think that generative AI is very similar to that. And I don't want to discourage people from using it and exploring it, because I think that since there's so much talk about it, it's a great opportunity for people to become involved, and we need as many voices involved as possible. And at the same time, it is also a point to proceed consciously and not just let the robots go on and do whatever they want. We have agency right now, and so using that agency and that power thoughtfully is important to me. So that's where I stand on generative AI personally.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that insight. I'm going to pull the thread a little bit. You talked about the environmental impact. I'm a little ignorant about that. I know there's a lot of power being used to, leverage these Gen AI models.
Mm-hmm.
Can you go in a little bit more in depth in that?
For sure. I'm still educating myself as well. But from my knowledge, I understand that also this is not just Gen AI, but the cloud, the internet, like where we store our data, there are data centers that exist and they use a lot of energy to have the generative AI do its thing and or to store data. And that uses a lot of water, a lot of electricity, and those things have environmental impacts. I've seen some statistics of like what the predicted energy use is for generative AI, and it is incredibly high. I think another aspect of the environmental impact of technology, I'll include technology in this conversation, not just generative AI. Another aspect of the environmental impact is the impact on people. I have seen some longer form videos or like shorter form documentaries that describe how data centers affect where people live. So poor air quality affecting the water. And I'm just really tired of the environment getting screwed over for every innovation that we have.
Right.
So there is certainly more to learn for me. I hope that people who are smarter than me will find ways to make generative AI more eco-friendly or sustainable. But that is not my area of expertise.
No, but I appreciate your insight on that. I think that's something that a lot of people really need to learn, that yes, it's almost like magic playing around with these models, but there is consequences to the environment and to the people surrounding that. I think I heard that they're looking at nuclear, little mini nuclear energy right next to the power plants, or next to the data centers. Definitely a lot to catch up on there. So I appreciate that. So let's go into the micro aspect.
Yeah.
Gen AI, is it good for the tech ed space there?
Yeah, so when used thoughtfully and carefully, I think that generative AI can be good for education. The generative part of it can be complicated when students, faculty, and or staff or teachers are creating their content with Gen AI and like not really being very thoughtful about it. You don't learn anything if you're just chat GPTing everything, right? And
Right.
I know we all have a lot of homework, but that doesn't help you in the long run, right? And similarly for teachers and faculty, we got a lot on our plates too, but it's not always the only solution. I think where generative AI can be really helpful in education is augmenting humans' abilities. Like that's one of the biggest problems in education, is that our educators are extremely overworked. And so that's why a lot of students fall through the cracks. Creating curriculum that's more personalized and helps students stay engaged and like school and therefore do well in school, I'm good with that. AI tools that help counselors identify students who may be starting to slip and be able to focus their attention on them so that they don't drop out. Hell yeah. Like I want to see more of that. So I think education and EdTech, I think education could use a little bit more EdTech. They're just very education can be a very clunky system, and I have hope that more technology will make things better for our students. Ultimately, that's the goal.
There has to be a balance, right? It can't be, I think I read recently that somewhere in Texas, a new school setting up, probably not public, but private, and they're just going to be leveraging AI. So I just saw the headline. I didn't dive deep into that, but the way the headline was phrased, it made it seem that they're going all the way into AI. And to your point, if you write a term paper, are you really learning anything? And yes, I know students will push back. Well, why do I need to know about the Romans or history? It doesn't pertain to what we're doing now. But actually, it does. There's cycles in history that unfortunately repeat itself there. I think we talked about right before hitting the record button that I never took a bio and fed it into ChatGPT and say, hey, come up with some questions. So I have a question for you that it actually came up with some good questions.
Yeah. Good job, ChatGPT. High five.
Right. Right. So if you were in charge of redesigning our education system, and then leveraging technology, what would you focus on first?
My answer is going to be a little bit boring, but important. If I had to redesign education with like technology in mind, I would do basic data infrastructure and technology infrastructure things. Something that's very frustrating to me right now is the rise of generative AI and technology and education. Education's not ready for it. And it's by no fault of educators or education leaders necessarily. There hasn't been time or money to invest in proper data and technology infrastructure. So as an example, there are still a lot of schools and students who don't have good Wi-Fi or don't have computers or like recent computers for students. There are a lot of solutions that can help colleges identify students that are starting to struggle. But if you don't have the data for that, then you can't help the students. And that's something that I saw a lot at the when I first transitioned into EdTech. We're helping schools identify students who may drop out. And the biggest struggle was making sure that we were getting fed all of the data that they had. It lived in like 7 different places and it wasn't clean they didn't actually collect data on certain things that would be helpful for the algorithm to be able to identify students who needed help. So if I could go back and redesign education and technology, I would do the really boring things of making sure that everybody had electricity and Wi-Fi and data and the capacity, the people and the technological capacity to store data and to integrate technology effectively. And that's really boring, but it's a reality that colleges and schools are facing right now. I don't care how cool your product is. If schools don't have the people to implement it and use it well, it's just gonna sit there.
Yeah, no, I love that the response there, Ale. I wouldn't call it boring. I would call it necessary, right?
I mean, I think it's necessary, but it's not like the flashy answer that I think a lot of people expect, but it is necessary.
Yeah, but I think that's the dichotomy that we talked about earlier, right? Being in kind of a bureaucratic system, everything is slow, there's money issues, etc. You flip over to the private sector, it's go, go, go. And they don't realize that who's being left behind. It's, the students at the end of the day who are going to be the future leaders of our country. And yeah, they don't have the basic resources. I think in my first podcast, this is going probably a year and a half ago, somebody mentioned that the majority of people still don't have access to the internet or they're on dial-up. And
Right.
that really hit me because I've been super fortunate that I've had high-speed internet since the late 90s, right? I grew up on, the modem AOL, you've got mail. So I'm definitely old. But since then, I got AOL DSL, which is a faster than dial-up. And then from there, I left it all behind.
Yeah.
And for them to mention that, hey, there's people, and to your point, that Wi-Fi doesn't even work, or
Yeah.
they don't even have internet. So I think that is a perfect answer on how to redesign the education system in this technological world that we live in.
Yeah.
So I definitely appreciate that. So
Glad.
what has been some challenges, or actually not challenges, but what has surprised you most about being in technology?
Mm-hmm. Good question. What has surprised me the most about being in technology? I'll answer specifically to EdTech, and this is no shade to anybody, but something that has really surprised me in EdTech is how the techies sometimes are selling to schools or like are trying to create solutions for schools and have no idea what education is like. I kind of expected it, but it doesn't stop surprising me. I just don't understand how you do that.
Yeah.
But again, it's no shade to anyone creating something is very admirable. I think I would just like to see more like integration of like teacher or student voices, or hiring more former educators or experts in the education space. And that goes really for any sector within technology. Like if you're creating health solutions, or I don't know, anything, just like understand who you're working for, really.
And I think that's a massive opportunity, right? Because there
Definitely.
seems to be a disconnect where, people selling their technology and not really understanding their customers, right? And the only way to do that is, well, let's try to hire or take the time to learn on exactly what their needs and requirements are. So
Yeah.
then, hopefully their services can address those needs. So
Hmm.
I love that answer. In closing, I always I'm an avid reader. I don't know if you could see all the books over here to my left. It wasn't like that. When I was younger, I avoided books. I just did not like to read. So I'm playing a lot of catch up. I'm like in the middle of various books. So what book have you recently read or are currently reading, and now podcast that you like to share? So I'm collecting the best inclusive cyber library, if you will, and a lot of great books from previous guests that they already mentioned.
So I'm kind of the opposite of you, Danny. I feel like I have PTSD from college, and now when I start to read for fun, I start to read super fast because I'm
Yeah.
like, I have homework due. I don't read a lot these days. And I also don't really listen to podcasts. I think I'm a recovering overachiever. And so I actually really enjoy my silence, and that helps me just like process the day and be ready for the next thing. A two-part answer to your question. I don't really have a book that I read recently. However, two things that I can contribute to the answer. A book that I did read of, I think, what as I was transitioning into EdTech, that I really enjoyed surprisingly was That Will Never Work. It's the book that one of the Netflix founders or co-founders wrote, and that was a really good introduction to the startup world and the tech world for me. And it was actually a very enjoyable story. So That Will Never Work. I don't remember the author, but it's the one of the Netflix founders. And then I don't really do podcasts. Um, I just need silence sometimes. So what I do instead, multiple times a day, I am very lucky that I have a beautiful yard in the house that I rent. I go out to my garden multiple times a day, and I check to see how the plants are doing. I see a little lizard running by, or the bees are like doing their thing. That's not tech related, but I think that I'm a really big advocate for balance in our lives, and having a holistic approach to life. I think taking some space from the tech world makes me a better techie. So looking at the bees buzzing and the lizard running and whether the zucchini came in or not, that gives me a perspective about what I want technology to look like in our world. So I don't have a podcast, but if you can grow some tomatoes, I really recommend that.
I love that, Ali. I think for me personally, I don't go out much. I'm here in my basement. I work remote. I think that's great advice. Connect with nature, kind of ground yourself, and unplug at the end of the day. So that is great advice.
The greatest ideas may come when we least expect them, or when we're not trying.
That is
I'll
so
give my
true.
brain some of that space.
So, Ale, I love this conversation. I wish we can keep on going, but I want to be respectful of your time, everything, your kind of philosophy, giving back to the community and bridging that education and ed tech space, I think is critical, especially in this current day and age where education is not prioritized, it's being attacked
Yeah.
different fronts there. My hat's off to you for doing the work that a lot of people won't do because maybe they don't pay as much. And educators, I think we've noticed that they're the foundation for this country and any country, right? Because if we don't
Yeah.
learn and people take the time, then it's going to have a negative cascading effects there for future generations. So thank you for doing the great work.
No, thank you. You don't have to thank me. I'm so lucky to be able to work in education.
I love that. But again, we'd love to continue this conversation, maybe outside of the camera here being in front of us. But again, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It was so fun talking to you today.